My name is Emily. I'm 31 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. I own a small company specializing in designing living spaces ranging from apartments and townhouses to small cafes that clients want to turn into places that evoke emotions. I'm not wealthy, but I earn enough to support myself, take care of my husband, and provide for my daughter, Ava, 8 years old, the light of my life. My family doesn't come from an upper-class background, but my parents, Stephen and Claudia, have always wanted people to think otherwise. I was born and raised in a family where appearances were everything. My father ran a well-known furniture store in town, while my mother always carried expensive handbags and spoke in polished, calculated words. To them, success wasn't about peace of mind. It was about receiving admiration from others. In the eyes of outsiders, they were a model couple, full of love and warmth, but as someone on the inside, I knew their love was never distributed equally. I have a younger brother named Dylan, 2 years my junior. From an early age, I learned one thing very clearly. In my family, effort didn't always lead to recognition. When I scored a perfect grade on my 8th grade math exam, my mother simply said, "Good, you did what you were supposed to." But when Dylan got a B+ in history, the whole family threw a small celebration, complete with cake and laughter. I stood in the kitchen corner, watching them cheer as if Dylan had just won a full-ride scholarship to Harvard. I never blamed my brother. Dylan never had to try to be loved, he just had to exist, and attention naturally gravitated toward him. I was the opposite. I studied hard, got a part-time job at 16 to buy my own books, and got into college without so much as a single congratulatory word from my parents. When I told them I had been accepted into an architecture program in Chicago, my mother barely nodded. That must not have been easy, but try your best. And yet, when Dylan got into a local community college, they threw a farewell party, hired a live band, and flooded social media with the caption, "So proud of our beloved son." I learned to stand on my own at a young age. I expected nothing from them, and over time, I stopped feeling hurt. I poured myself into work, building my company from a shared rental office to having my own space. Not big, but mine. I met my husband, Matt, on a March afternoon while surveying a model apartment for a new project. He was an electrical engineer, hired to install a smart lighting system. We talked about colors, light, and how a room could influence a person's emotions. A year later, we were married. Then, Ava was born, with a smile just like Matt's, and curious eyes just like mine. The first few years after Ava was born, we weren't financially stable, but we were happy. I continued running my design firm while Matt worked at a construction company. We chose a small apartment near a park where we could hear children laughing through the window in the afternoons. Ava grew up healthy, energetic, always carrying a picture book she loved. There was only one thing I hadn't done yet: get full health insurance for our family. The cost was high, our income was still unstable, and since all three of us were healthy, I kept telling myself we could wait a little longer. I had no idea that hesitation would lead to a moment that would change my life forever. A moment that would force me to stand before my parents in utter desperation, only to hear words that I still remember, word for word. I once thought I had grown numb to being overlooked in my own family, but as it turns out, sometimes parental indifference isn't just about being forgotten at dinner. It can be a cold, sharp blade, cutting deep into the trust you thought had long since faded. I remember the day Dylan got a job at a newly established real estate firm. My mother sent an email to the entire family with the subject line, "Exciting news for our family." They held a celebration at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown where a single appetizer cost as much as half of Ava's monthly preschool tuition. I attended, not because I wanted to congratulate Dylan, but because I didn't want to embarrass my family. I was busy all week, but I still showed up, bringing a small but thoughtful gift, a personalized engraved fountain pen, a fitting gift for someone starting out in business. I handed it to Dylan, and he barely glanced at it before setting it aside, continuing to show off his new smartwatch. "A gift from Mom and Dad, to encourage me?" I said nothing. No one had ever given me anything when I opened my first design office. My parents had only said, "Hope you can figure things out when you fail." No words of encouragement, no phone calls to check in. I gradually realized that, to them, Dylan was an image investment, a charming, well-spoken man who knew how to impress a crowd. And me? I was the quiet woman, the realist, not good at socializing, uninterested in empty conversations. In their eyes, I held no performative value. One time, my mother said it outright after I refused to attend a charity gala she was hosting. "You can't keep avoiding society like this. You're the crack in this family's perfect picture." I remember standing there, staring at the expensive pearl necklace she wore, a piece of jewelry she once told me I wasn't worthy of touching. Every Thanksgiving, our family gathered at my parents' suburban mansion in Boulder. The dinner was meticulously planned, the guest list carefully curated. Lawyers, doctors, people with status. I always felt out of place among the echoes of laughter and shallow praise showered on Dylan. I would talk about my work, the projects I was excited about, the designs I was proud of, but no one listened. But when Dylan talked about a failed lease negotiation, everyone rushed to console him, as if his failure was a precious thing to be nurtured. One time, my mother stood in front of me and Ava, smiling sweetly as she said, "Ava is adorable, but she's a bit emotionally distant, probably because she doesn't spend enough time with her grandparents." I clenched my daughter's hand at that moment, my heart tightening painfully. Ava heard everything, and that night she asked me, "Mommy, did I do something wrong? Is that why Grandma does—" I forced a smile, held her tightly, and thought to myself, if anyone was wrong, it was me, for bringing her into that house full of pretense. I tried to keep my distance, but Matt always encouraged me to give it one more chance, to mend the family bond. He never truly understood how I felt. To him, I was too sensitive, too difficult to connect with, while my parents were just old-fashioned and had high expectations for their children. I didn't blame Matt. He didn't know what it was like growing up in my house. He didn't know the feeling of waiting for a compliment after a perfect test score only to receive a dismissive nod. He had never been endlessly compared to someone else. Never seen his mother's disappointed look when he chose design over law or medicine. I always thought I had grown used to it, but I was wrong. Because when Ava collapsed on the floor, her breath weak and her face pale, when I rushed her to the hospital, trembling as the doctor told me she needed emergency surgery, my first thought was my parents. I know it sounds ridiculous. I know they had turned their backs on me so many times, but in that moment, I thought, they're Ava's grandparents. They can't ignore this. Not this time. I didn't know I was about to face one of the cruelest shocks of my life, and this time, it wasn't just me suffering the consequences. It was my little girl, the one I loved more than anything. Ava started coughing in the middle of last autumn, as the cold wind seeped through the cracks of our small apartment. At first, I thought it was just a common cold. She was still playful, still asking for Matt's mac and cheese every night. But then the coughs wouldn't stop. They worsened at night, waking her up, leaving her clutching her chest, gasping for air. We took her to a nearby clinic. The doctor said it was likely mild bronchitis, prescribed medication, and told us to monitor her. But I knew. The worried glance the doctor gave Ava wasn't just casual reassurance. 2 weeks later, Ava started getting exhausted. Each step felt heavier. One afternoon, she was drawing when she suddenly sat down on the rug, whispering, "Mommy, my heart is beating too fast." I held her, feeling her cold skin, my own heart pounding with fear. Matt drove us to the city hospital while I sat in the back seat, holding Ava close, my hands shaking uncontrollably. They ran blood tests, x-rays, and CT scans. We waited in a cold, white room under fluorescent lights that made the air feel heavy with dread. The doctor returned nearly 3 hours later, holding a thick file, his face so serious that I had to grip the armrest to stay steady. "We found an abnormal mass in Ava's left lung," he said carefully, his voice calm but direct. "It's most likely benign, but its location is pressing against her airway. If we don't operate soon, her condition could worsen quickly." A ringing filled my ears. Matt stood frozen beside me, unblinking. I could only manage one question in a voice I barely recognized as my own. Does she need surgery? Right away? The doctor nodded. We recommend proceeding as soon as possible, within the next 3 days, and he looked at us, hesitating slightly. The cost for the surgery and post-suppressive care is approximately $98,000. I froze. That number hit me like a slap in the face. I knew we didn't have insurance. We had planned to sign up, but every time I saw the monthly premiums, I kept telling myself, just wait a little longer, after the next project is secured. I always thought we had time, but now I realized sometimes a single moment is enough to render all plans meaningless. Matt squeezed my hand. We'll find a way. Please prepare everything for the surgery. The doctor nodded, handed the paperwork to a nurse, and left the room. I looked at Matt. His eyes were trying to stay calm, but I knew he was just as overwhelmed as I was. We had about $15,000 in our savings account. That wasn't enough, not even a fifth of what we needed. I called the bank to request an emergency loan. They denied it because our credit score wasn't high enough. I posted on social media, hoping friends would help spread the word, but time was too short, and the amount was too high. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by Ava's hospital bed, holding her hand, listening to each weak, uneven breath. In the dim glow of the nightlight, her face looked heartbreakingly pale. I pressed a kiss to her forehead and stood up. One thought consumed me. I couldn't let Ava lie here, waiting in vain. I pulled out my phone and dialed the familiar number. My mother's. Why are you calling at this hour, Emily? Her voice was light, but cold. I took a deep breath. Ava is in the hospital. She needs emergency surgery. Mom, I need help. We don't have enough money. Please, just a part of it. I'll pay you back. There was a brief silence on the other end before my mother sighed. Well, this is really bad timing. You know, next week is your father's and my 40th wedding anniversary celebration. Everything has been arranged. So many guests have been invited. It would be so inconvenient to postpone now, Emily. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I'm not asking you to cancel your party, just a little. Ava is your granddaughter. She's in critical condition. Her voice turned stern. Emily, you already know this. We can't tarnish the family's reputation over a personal problem. I'm very sorry, but I can't help you. I couldn't say another word. I hung up. The pain in my chest swelled, not from being rejected, but because the last sliver of hope I had was crushed. I returned to Ava's bedside, wrapped my arms around her small body, and whispered to myself, if my own family could turn their backs on their own granddaughter, then from this moment on, I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, after nearly a sleepless night by Ava's side, I decided to do something I had sworn I would never do again. Return to my parents' mansion. I think I can handle that. I squeezed my hair hard. I knew if I did, they would refuse to see me or come up with an excuse. I put on a dark coat, tied my hair back, and stepped into Matt's old car, gripping Ava's medical records tightly. When I arrived, the driveway was packed with cars. Soft music drifted from the backyard, mixed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. The house was lavishly decorated with white flowers, gold ribbons, and sparkling crystal lights. It took me a few seconds to understand today was the rehearsal party for Dylan's engagement to his fiancée Natalie, the daughter of a wealthy real estate tycoon in the area. I stepped into the grand foyer and immediately felt the weight of stares from the elegantly dressed guests. No one offered me a drink or asked where I had come from. Their gazes brushed past me as if I were a misplaced server who had wandered into the wrong section. I spotted my mother across the room, laughing with a group of older guests, a champagne flute in her hand. I walked straight toward her, stopping right in front of her. "Mom," I said, my voice urgent, "please, give me 5 minutes. It's important." She looked me up and down, her expression momentarily displeased, as if I had interrupted an important speech. Emily, I'm entertaining guests. Can this wait? I shook my head, my voice trembling but firm. No, it's about Ava. She needs emergency surgery. Mom, I'm begging you. Just help with a portion of the cost. We've already sold everything we can. She hesitated for a brief moment, but then her eyes turned cold. Emily, do you know what today is? This is Dylan's pre-wedding celebration. Everything has been planned for months. Couldn't you have chosen a better time? I swallowed hard, pulled the medical records from my bag and opened them in front of her. Mom, please read this. The doctor said if she doesn't get surgery soon, Ava may not survive. We need $98,000. Mom, she's your granddaughter. The music slowed, and I noticed some people around us had started to listen. A couple standing nearby stepped back. My mother glanced around, then lowered her voice, leaning in. You're embarrassing me, Emily. This is not the place to discuss this. I'm very sorry, but I can't help. The money has already been spent on catering, the wedding dress, the band. Where do you expect me to find nearly $100,000 now? I turned and saw my father. He was standing beside Dylan and a few well-dressed men. As I walked toward them, my father frowned. Emily, what's going on? Did you come here to cause a scene? No, I came to ask for your help, I said directly. Ava needs surgery. I just need a portion of the cost. Please, Dad. She's your granddaughter. Dylan let out a quiet chuckle, his voice light as air but sharp as a blade. Are you serious? Because you didn't plan ahead, now the whole family has to bear the burden? I'm about to get married, and you expect me to cancel everything? Don't be so selfish. I turned to Dylan, locking eyes with him. For the first time in years, I saw the emptiness behind his confident smile. I'm not asking you. I just hope you still have some conscience left. Dylan shook his head and raised his champagne glass. I'm focused on my future. Everyone has their own problems, Emily. Ava is your daughter, not my responsibility. I turned back to my parents, my voice trembling. I'm not asking for anything for myself. I'm asking to save Ava. She is the blood of this family. If family doesn't stand together in hard times, then is it even a family? My father sighed, then turned away, as if I were nothing more than a passing breeze. Emily, don't embarrass us any further. I stood in the middle of the grand ballroom, surrounded by shimmering lights and people who once called me the good daughter, Dylan's sister, Stephen and Claudia's child. But tonight they only looked at me with unease, pity, or worse, indifference. I nodded, tucked the medical records back into my bag, and walked out of that lavish mansion, the place I once called home. Every step on the stone pathway felt like a blow to my chest. When I got into the car and sat down, my tears finally fell, not from pain, but from the stark realization. To them, an extravagant party was more important than a child's life. I was no longer the Emily who kept trying to earn scraps of love from people who didn't know how to give it. From that moment on, I vowed to do whatever it took to save my daughter. Without ever begging them again, I returned to the hospital with a heavy heart and empty hands. Ava was still lying there, her lips dry, her breathing weak, while I felt as if the weight of the world was crushing my chest. Matt held me tightly as I told him everything. Every rejection, every condescending glance, and the moment I walked out of that mansion like a stranger. He didn't say much, just nodded, then whispered in my ear, "We'll save our daughter. We don't need anyone else." The next morning we took action. Matt put his beloved pickup truck up for sale, the truck we had driven across states on our honeymoon. I listed my work computer, printer, even our living room sofa on classified ads. Someone came to check out our furniture and asked, "Moving to a new place?" I just smiled, too exhausted to explain. We managed to gather nearly $29,000 in 3 days. It wasn't a small amount, but we were still far from our goal. I started calling every old friend I could think of. Some didn't answer, some hesitated, but there were also those I would never forget. Anna, My college friend, now a music teacher, sent $500 with a message. I know this isn't much, but it's my entire savings for this month. Ava will make it through. I read her message and tears streamed down my face. Travis, a young employee who had only been at my company for 4 months, walked into my office at noon. He placed an envelope on my desk. I have $320. I was going to buy a new laptop this morning, but I think Ava needs it more. I couldn't say a word. I just hugged him tightly. We received small contributions from friends, neighbors, even people I had only met once in my life. People who weren't bound to me by blood, who owed me nothing, yet still reached out to help. Even so, we were still nearly $40,000 short. I started considering taking out high-interest loans despite knowing the risks. I couldn't sleep, my heart constantly racing as if it were about to burst. And then, one evening, as I sat in Ava's hospital room, Matt's parents, Carol and Henry, came to visit. They lived in a small home in the southern suburbs of Denver, a house they had cherished for nearly 30 years. They weren't wealthy, just hardworking people. I expected nothing more than a hug and words of comfort. But as they entered the room, Henry pulled me aside into the hallway, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Emily," he said, his voice deep and unwavering. "Tomorrow morning, you and Matt need to come to our house. I have something to discuss." I looked at him, confused. What is it? He didn't answer. He just patted my shoulder, then glanced toward Ava's hospital bed, where she lay with a scarf wrapped around her head, an IV still in her tiny hand, and said, "Our granddaughter can't wait any longer." The next morning, Matt and I went to their house. It felt emptier than usual. The living room couch was gone, as were several paintings from the walls. Before I could ask, Carol walked out with a cup of hot tea, placed it on the table, then handed me a stack of papers. I picked them up and skimmed through them. A property transfer contract. The final line burned into my eyes. Sale price, $136,000. I stared at them, stunned. "Mom, Dad, why?" Carol took my hand, smiling gently. "You and Matt need the money to save Ava. This house is just a material thing. We can rent another place. But Ava only has one life. If it were you or Matt in this situation, wouldn't you do the same?" I broke down, not with loud sobs, just silent tears falling onto her hands. The same hands that had once knitted sweaters for Ava's first winter, the hands that had baked holiday treats every year. They weren't my parents by blood, but they chose to stand by me when no one else did. 3 days later, we had the full amount. The hospital scheduled the surgery immediately. The operation lasted 6 hours. 6 hours that felt like 6 years. I sat in the waiting room, clutching Ava's beaded necklace, a birthday gift she had made for me, with the words, "Best mom ever." When the doctor finally walked out, he nodded and gave a small smile. The surgery was a success. Ava will recover. She's incredibly strong. My legs gave out. I collapsed into a chair, covering my face as I sobbed, not from despair but from the overwhelming relief that hope was alive again. Ava had made it through. 3 days later, in a hospital room filled with sunlight, I watched her sleep peacefully, her breathing steady, her small hand unconsciously grasping mine. I knew that from now on, everything would be different. But deep inside me, something still lingered. The memory of that party, the indifferent stares of the people who shared my blood, and I swore, one day, they would understand what it meant to lose something truly important. After Ava's surgery and discharge from the hospital, I thought I would collapse from the exhaustion and financial strain of the past months. But I didn't. A fire that had been smoldering inside me for years had now ignited. I was no longer just working to support my family. I worked to repay kindness. I worked to prove to the world, and especially to those who had turned their backs on me, that I didn't need them to succeed. I started each day at 4:30 a.m. I restructured my entire company, From management systems to marketing strategies. I relearned everything I had once overlooked due to being too busy. Financial management, negotiation skills, digital marketing. By day, I took clients to site visits. By night, I sketched designs, drafted quotes, and sent emails to clients across the state. I even enrolled in a real estate negotiation course on weekends. My small interior design firm, once sharing office space with a nail salon, started landing bigger projects. Cafes, studios, a spa chain in the northern suburbs of Denver. Then a boutique hotel in Aspen. Word spread. A year later, I signed a contract to design interiors for a luxury apartment complex in the new commercial district. The project was worth over $1 million, 10 times any contract I had ever secured. It was the turning point that transformed my company from an obscure name into an industry leader. Modern Spaces magazine wrote an article about me with the headline, "Emily Monroe, from a simple mom to a woman shaping the spaces of thousands." They asked me what had driven me to this success. I looked straight into the camera, unwavering. I once begged my family to help save my daughter's life. They refused. I don't blame them anymore. But in that moment, I learned that I had to be the only pillar my daughter could rely on. And to do that, I had to become stronger than anyone who had ever tried to break me. The interview went viral on social media. Some admired me. Some were moved to tears. And then something I never expected happened. I received an invitation to appear on Voices of Resilience, a well-known talk show that shared stories of ordinary people overcoming adversity. They invited me to New York. During the recording, I told my entire story, from the years of being compared to Dylan to the night I knelt before my parents, begging them to help Ava. The host, a seasoned and sharp-witted woman, looked at me with deep respect. "Emily," she said, "if you could say one thing to the people who abandoned you in your darkest moment, what would it be?" I was silent for a few seconds, then smiled, calm and steady. "Thank you. Because of them, I no longer blindly seek approval from others. And because of them, I found my real family. The people who, despite not sharing my blood, were willing to sell their home to save my child's life." I never mentioned any names during the show, but to those who had witnessed me knocking on that mansion's door that day, who had seen me turned away like a stranger, they knew exactly who I was talking about. After the episode aired, I received hundreds of messages from mothers, fathers, and children who had been abandoned by their own families. They said I had given them hope, that they could rise again, even when pushed to the very bottom. A month later, Fortune Home magazine named my company one of the top 30 most influential interior brands in the Western U.S. My photo appeared on the cover, holding a blueprint, standing in the middle of a construction site, with a massive sign behind me that read, "Monroe Studio, designed to heal." I didn't cry. I didn't feel proud. I only felt at peace. Because I knew that all of this, every step forward, every drop of sweat, came from one thing: my love for Ava. She was my driving force, my reason to keep going, and proof that sometimes pain creates the greatest strength. But I also knew that the people who once turned their backs on me, they were watching. And I had never forgotten my mother's eyes when I begged her to help her granddaughter. I hadn't forgotten my father's nod, as if he were declining an unworthy business deal. They thought I would always be the weak Emily they once knew, but they were wrong. And I was certain they were about to realize that. I never intended to hurt them. When I shared my story on television, I didn't name anyone. I didn't point fingers. I simply told the truth. The raw truth I had carried in my heart for years. But some truths, when spoken in the light, have more power than any accusation. After Voices of Resilience aired, my story spread faster than I expected. Local news outlets began sharing articles, then smaller TV networks invited me for interviews. People connected the dots from the details I had shared. It didn't take long for them to find out that I was the daughter of Stephen and Claudia Monroe, owners of Monroe's Living, and the sister of Dylan Monroe, the real estate broker who once bragged on LinkedIn about his $30,000 engagement ring. I realized the true media storm had begun when an anonymous account reposted a clip from the talk show with the headline, "Parents spend hundreds of thousands on an engagement party, refused to save dying granddaughter, and now their daughter is a millionaire?" The post gained over 500,000 shares in 2 days. Soon after, Monroe's Living began receiving one-star reviews on online platforms. Customers canceled their orders. Some suppliers announced they were cutting ties. The same people who once shook hands with my father and toasted champagne at his parties quietly removed him from their contact lists, because no one wanted to be associated with a family that had turned its back on its own blood to protect their reputation. A week later, I received news that the store had to temporarily close due to financial and legal reasons. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel satisfied. Just an odd emptiness. Like an old chapter being reopened, laid bare under the sun with nothing left to hide. And then there was Dylan. He was once the golden child, the pride of the family, the one who stood in elegant gatherings delivering charming speeches. But now, whenever his name appeared online, people only remembered one thing: the man who laughed in his sister's face when she begged for her daughter's life. Natalie, the fiancée once seen as his perfect match, didn't say a word. She simply erased all their wedding photos, removed her engagement status, and a few days later filed to call off the wedding. I heard from an old acquaintance that Natalie had read the articles, then confronted my parents directly. When they didn't deny anything, she immediately left the apartment she shared with Dylan and moved back in with her mother. Dylan couldn't handle the fallout. His business connections dropped him one by one. He called me one night, his voice hoarse. "Emily, what did you do?" I said nothing. "You went on TV, you made everyone think I'm heartless." I exhaled slowly. "I didn't make anyone think anything, Dylan. I just told the truth. I didn't twist anything. If the truth makes you feel ashamed, then the problem isn't me." He was silent. Then he hung up. I thought that call was the end, but it wasn't. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. From my mother. Pale yellow paper, neat but slightly shaky handwriting, as if her hands were no longer steady. "Emily, we have lost everything. Your father is selling the mansion, Dylan is unemployed, our family name is in ruins. I am not writing to blame you. I am writing because I don't know what else to do. We were wrong, I know that, but please, if you have any mercy left, help us." I read the letter over and over that night. I thought about that mansion, the place where I was turned away in the middle of laughter and expensive wine. I thought about Ava's fragile breaths in that hospital bed. I thought about the aged hands of Matt's parents, the ones who, despite not sharing our blood, had sold their home to save their granddaughter. And I realized, some losses cannot be repaired with money. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't feel joy at their downfall, but I also no longer held resentment. It was simply that now I had a new family. The ones who showed love through actions, not empty prestige. And I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Not everyone you are born to will walk with you until the end. And a part of me knew this wouldn't be the last time they reached out to me. But next time, I would be the one setting the terms. After everything that happened, I understood something more deeply than ever. No one succeeds alone. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how strong I became, Ava was still alive today not just because of my willpower but because of the kindness of those around me. People who didn't share my blood, yet chose to stand by me when the world turned away. I wrote down the names of every person who had helped me in a notebook, not to keep track of debts, but to remind myself never to forget. When my company started making real profits, I didn't think about luxury cars or mansions. I thought about the people who had given their last dollars without expecting anything in return. I invited Anna, the old friend who had sent me $500, to my company's headquarters. She still drove the same old red car with peeling paint, still wore the same knitted coat she had patched up countless times. I handed her a thick envelope, and when she opened it, her eyes widened. "Emily, this is—" "I know you never asked for anything," I said, smiling, "but I want you to use this to finally start the music school you always dreamed of. You saved my daughter. Now it's my turn to help you rebuild your dream." She hugged me, tears streaming down her cheeks. No more words were needed. Her embrace was enough to say everything. I also visited Travis, the young employee who had once given me his meager savings. By now, he had been promoted to lead designer, and I awarded him a full scholarship to a prestigious design institute in Chicago, the place he had once thought was just an impossible dream. His eyes welled up with tears, but they were filled with determination. I knew, just like me, he would turn his gratitude into something extraordinary. As for my in-laws, Henry and Carol, I owed them a lifetime. I remembered vividly the day they moved out of their old home after selling it to save Ava. They didn't cry, they didn't complain. They simply said, as long as Ava is healthy, anywhere is home. But I never forgot the sight of them holding each other tightly in that tiny rented apartment on the south side of the city, wrapping their old dishes in newspaper. When my company was invited to design interiors for a luxury housing development, I quietly kept track of real estate transactions. After months of negotiations, I bought back their old home, the very house they had once sold to save their granddaughter, from its new owner. I didn't say anything right away. I waited until Carol's birthday. That day, I brought the whole family over and hosted a small celebration. Ava had drawn a giant card with wobbly letters, "I love you, Grandma and Grandpa, because you saved me." After dinner, I handed Carol a small box. She opened it and found an old house key along with a copy of the property deed. Her eyes trembled, her hands shaking. "Emily, what did you do?" she whispered. I simply smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I just wanted you to come back home." Henry stayed silent for a long moment, then gripped my hand tightly, as if trying to say 1,000 words with just that one gesture. A few months later, I made a big decision: to build a new home for our entire family. Not a lavish mansion, but a spacious, warm house with enough room for Ava, Matt, Carol, Henry, and the second child we were expecting. I wanted my children to grow up in a home filled with love, where every meal was accompanied by laughter, not judgmental stares or heavy silence. When Ava heard that her grandparents would be living with us, she jumped up excitedly. "So that means I get to have Grandma's pancakes every morning, right, Mom?" I nodded and hugged her tightly, my heart warming at her innocent words. Our new home sat on the outskirts of the city, overlooking rolling hills that turned white with snow in the winter. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of Ava and Henry chatting in the kitchen, Carol tending to the small garden in the backyard, and Matt flipping through new blueprints in his office. I needed nothing more. I didn't live for revenge, but I lived to remember, and to repay kindness in the fullest way possible. Because I believed that gratitude, given at the right place and the right time, was the most powerful way to heal wounds and open a new chapter. A chapter of true happiness, needing no approval from anyone but my own heart. I had lost one family, but I had found another. And that was the greatest gift life had given me. Life moved forward in a pace I once thought I would never have. Ava was healthy and happy, back in school. Matt managed the company's new branch. Carol and Henry lived with us, bringing a warmth that truly made our house a home. I thought all the old wounds had finally closed. Until one late afternoon at the start of winter, when my phone buzzed on my desk, displaying an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. "Emily? It's your mother." A trembling voice came through the line. I gripped the phone tightly, memories flooding back in an instant. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 3 years, since the day I walked away from that mansion with a shattered heart. "I'm calling because we're in trouble," she continued, each word heavy. The bank is about to seize the house. Your father signed a mortgage loan to keep the store running, but we can't pay it back. I didn't respond. I didn't want to bother you. But if you could help, just $200,000 to save the house. After that, we'll manage on our own. I let out a quiet laugh. Not in amusement, not in anger. Just a silent, knowing laugh, as if I had been expecting this call for a long time. Mom, I said calmly, do you remember the last time I begged you for help? When my daughter was in the hospital, needing emergency surgery? The other end of the line fell silent. Then, a long, broken sigh. I remember. I was wrong, Emily. Back then, I didn't think straight. I didn't realize how serious things were. Not serious? I heard my own voice turn ice cold. A child lying on the brink of death? And you call that not serious? I'm sorry, she choked out, her voice breaking into a sob. I know nothing can make up for it, but we're family. Family? I repeated. Family is the one who sells their home to save their grandchild, not the one who raises a glass at a party and turns away when their own blood begs for a life. She was silent. Then she whispered, So, you won't help? I sighed. I will help, but on one condition. You and Dad must come to my company and receive the money in person. Yes, she responded quickly, as if clinging to a final lifeline. 2 days later, at the agreed time, they arrived. The conference room on the third floor of my company was bright with winter sunlight. On the table sat a sleek black suitcase. Inside was exactly $200,000, neatly stacked in bundles. When they entered, I no longer saw the commanding presence they once carried. My father looked frail, his hair streaked with gray, deep hollows under his eyes. My mother wore an old coat, no longer the elegant woman who once scoffed at my dress for being too plain. They sat across from me, hesitant, unable to find the words. I opened the suitcase and turned it toward them. This is the money you need, I said, not raising my voice but making sure every word was clear. Not because I still have feelings for you, but because I don't want anyone to sleep on the streets, not even the ones who abandoned me. My mother reached out for the suitcase, but I stopped her. Wait, I said, my eyes cold. Before you take this money, I want to say one thing. They both looked up at me. From the moment you walk out of this room, I will no longer consider you my parents. No contact, no visits, no requests. This is the last time I will help. My mother burst into tears. Emily, you can't. I can, I cut her off. And I have to, because I need to protect the people who are truly my family. Matt, Ava, Carol, and Henry. They sacrificed everything for me. And you? What did you do when your granddaughter was dying? No one answered. Just muffled sobs and downcast eyes. I stood up and signaled to my assistant. Please escort our guests out. My father clutched the suitcase as if holding on to the last remnants of his pride. They walked past me without a single word of farewell. As the door shut behind them, I looked down at my hands. Not trembling, not unsteady, just calm, as if the final chapter had been turned. That night, when I told Matt and Carol what had happened, no one criticized me. Matt simply held my hand tightly. You did the right thing. You are stronger than anyone. I nodded. But I knew, deep down, this wasn't a victory. This was just an ending of a bond that had fractured too many times to ever be repaired. I had given, but I had also chosen to keep what was most precious to me, my peace. And sometimes, that's all we need to move forward. After that final meeting at my company, I never heard from my parents again. No calls, no letters, no signs that they wanted to reach out. And strangely, I didn't feel empty or regretful. Maybe because I had truly let go. I once thought that when the time came to say a final goodbye to them, I would feel guilt. But in reality, the only thing I felt was relief. Relief that I no longer had to exhaust myself proving my worth to people who had never truly loved me. Relief that I had made my choice. I chose the people who had reached out to save my child, not the ones who turned away to save face. I didn't hold resentment, but I didn't forgive either. Forgiveness to me isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let the past dictate my present. And my present now is a home, filled with laughter, a stable career, and a life that isn't lavish, but is rich with gratitude. Sometimes, I wonder if there will come a day when they call again. Maybe when they're sick. Maybe when Dylan faces a crisis. Maybe when everything falls apart beyond repair. And when that day comes, what will I do? I don't have a clear answer. I am human. My heart still holds contradictions that logic cannot fully untangle. I once stood before my father, seeing that he had aged 10 years in just one, and part of me still felt pain. But I also remember how he turned his back when I begged to save Ava. I remember how my mother held her wine glass instead of my hand. I remember it all. And perhaps because I remember so vividly, I haven't slammed the door shut completely. But that door now rests in my hands, not as an open wound, but as the greatest lesson of my life. I share this story not to attack anyone, not to dwell on the past, or to seek sympathy. I share it because I know there are many people out there like me. People who have been shattered by their own families. People who believed they had to endure, to sacrifice, just because of the words blood ties. But the truth is, not everyone who shares your blood is your family. And sometimes, choosing to walk away isn't cruelty, it's learning to save yourself. If you are standing at the crossroads of duty and pain, I want to tell you this: you are not alone. And you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to love without being used. You have the right to protect yourself and those who deserve it, even if it means walking away from relationships that once felt impossible to leave. Today, every morning, I wake up in a home filled with warmth and joy. Ava is always the first to run into my room, hugging me tight and whispering, "Last night, I dreamed you were a superhero, Mom." That simple sentence is enough to assure me that every painful decision I made was the right one. Matt often tells me I'm the strongest person he's ever met. I'm not sure if I'm strong, but I know I am someone who has learned how to stand up. Not just for myself, but for the family I rebuilt from nothing, but my 2 hands, and a heart that never stopped hoping. If you've read this far, I want to ask you something. If one day, the people who hurt you come back, asking for help, what would you do? Would you help them to prove you've risen above it all? Or would you hold on to your peace, refusing to be dragged back into the pain? Let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment below. I want to hear your story, truly. Because maybe, somewhere in the puzzle pieces of life, we are all just trying to learn how to forgive. Or, at the very least, how to let go with grace. And if you've been through something like I have, never forget. You deserve happiness, peace, and a family. Whether by blood or by choice, that puts you first. Thank you for listening to my story. This was my journey, and now, how will you write yours? What do you think of Emily's decision? If it were you, what would you do in that situation? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow this channel for more powerful stories about life and family. My name is Margaret, 23 years old, and I recently graduated with honors in technology engineering from a university in Massachusetts. On my graduation day, no one from my family attended. No flowers, no congratulations, not even a proud glance. Just a text from my mother. Your father says that since you chose your own path, you should take full responsibility for it. That evening, I returned home, standing in the middle of the vast mansion I once called home, a cold space where everything gleamed under crystal chandeliers but held not a trace of warmth. My father stood at the top of the staircase, his gray suit crisply pressed, holding a glass of red wine that I knew he never actually drank, just for show. "So you're really turning down the position at the company?" he asked, his tone flat, as if he were reading the morning paper. Yes, I don't want to work in finance. I want to pursue energy engineering research, I replied, keeping my voice steady. His eyes were cold as stone. Engineering? He pronounced each syllable as if I had just declared I wanted to become a magician. Aren't you ashamed of betraying the family tradition? From your grandfather to me, the entire Preston lineage has thrived on finance. Investing is in our blood. And you? You want to be an engineer? Some mechanic assembling machines. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I want to create something with real value. I don't want to just shift money from one account to another. He scoffed, his laughter echoing in the luxurious but empty space. Then, as if he had been waiting for this moment, he reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a wad of small bills, and tossed them onto the marble floor right at my feet. Here, $200. That's all someone like you is worth. No more trust fund, no more Preston name. Nothing. I watched the bills flutter to the ground like dry autumn leaves, cold, weightless, and devoid of emotion. It wasn't the money itself that hurt. It was the way he threw it, as if I were nothing more than a failed product being discarded. My mother stood a few steps away, holding her second cocktail of the afternoon. She said nothing, just looked at me with an expression that was both cold and pitying. No defense, no, I'll talk to your father, just silence. So long and heavy that it ached. I bent down, picked up the bills, placed them in my wallet, then stood up, my eyes never leaving my father's. Thank you, Father, I said slowly. I will turn this $200 into something greater than you ever imagined. He flicked his hand toward the door, signaling the end of the performance in which he had played director. Get out of my house. You're no longer a Preston. I pulled my only suitcase through the door without looking back. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a deep thud, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of something entirely new. I stepped down the stone staircase, where the car I had used during college was no longer there. It had been repossessed, as it was registered under the company's name. I had no home, no car, not a single bank card in my pocket. But I had my old laptop, a few engineering schematics on my hard drive, and an idea. An idea that I believed could change the way the world stored and used energy. I lifted my head to the Boston night sky, the wind tousling my hair, making me shiver slightly. $200 in my wallet, a dream in my heart, and nothing left to lose. That was the moment I knew. I was free. I boarded the last night bus out of Boston at 11:20 p.m., my destination, San Jose, the beating heart of America's tech industry. The journey lasted over 70 hours, during which I barely ate anything except a few crackers and a small water bottle that a kind passenger gave me. The night's cold seeped through my thin coat, but it wasn't as chilling as the feeling of being disowned by my family. When I stepped off the bus in San Jose, I had less than $120 left after paying for the ticket and travel expenses. I had no contacts here, no place to go. I dragged my suitcase out of the station, found a nearby park, and sat down on a wooden bench under a large oak tree. That night, I slept with my laptop as a pillow and an old scarf draped over me. I thought I would cry, that I would curse life, but I didn't. I only felt calm. Maybe because, for the first time, I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I bought a sandwich and a small black coffee from a convenience store nearby, $7 in total. While sitting on a stone bench eating, I opened my old laptop and typed 3 lines on the first page of my digital notebook. I will never use the Preston name to achieve anything in life. I will create something that changes how the world uses energy. When I return, it will be on my own terms. I owe them nothing. After writing, I closed my laptop and looked up at the buildings in the distance, glowing under the rising sun. They seemed to whisper, telling me to start. But how do you begin when you don't even know what the first step is? I spent the entire day wandering through downtown San Jose's office districts, looking for part-time work, any job that would help me survive a few days. Everyone turned me down. No experience. Not hiring. We're downsizing. I heard the same lines so many times that they blurred together. By late afternoon, I sat down at a small cafe called Rust and Bean. While nursing a $2 iced tea to make use of the Wi-Fi for job applications, I noticed a middle-aged man struggling to fix a coffee machine that was making a strange noise. Maybe it was my engineer's instincts kicking in, but I stood up and asked, softly, "Do you need help?" I studied electrical mechanical engineering. At first, he hesitated, but after I pointed out that the strange hissing sound was caused by a misaligned pressure valve, he reluctantly let me try. 10 minutes later, the machine was running smoothly again. He looked at me, surprised. "How did you do that?" "I read the schematic and listened." I smiled. The man, Chuck, was the cafe owner. He not only let me sleep in the storage room upstairs, but also offered me a job as a maintenance assistant. Low pay, but enough to keep me afloat. I accepted immediately. The following days became a cycle of early mornings cleaning machines and checking equipment, and late nights refining my designs for a renewable energy storage project I had conceived back in my sophomore year of college. The technology was still unfinished, but I knew that if I could perfect it, it could revolutionize the way people stored solar energy. Something that was becoming more common, but still limited by current battery efficiency. One evening, while redrawing the core design, Maya, the cafe's only waitress, walked in. She glanced at my sketches and asked, "What are you working on? Looks like a treasure map." I laughed, flipping the page over to explain in the simplest terms. She listened intently, then suddenly said, "So if you make this work, electricity will be cheaper and more sustainable?" "Not just cheaper, safer, cleaner, and more adaptable. It could help remote areas become self-sufficient without relying on national grids." Maya didn't fully understand, but her smile made me feel that what I was pursuing wasn't just ambition. It was something that truly mattered. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new folder, naming it Aurora, the name for my battery project. I knew countless long nights and failures lay ahead. But I also knew one thing. I had started, and I wasn't going to stop. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because, for the first time, I was living for myself. "Excuse me," I asked gently, "is that the power distribution model for a multi-layer energy charging system?" The man looked up, surprised. "You know about this?" "I'm conducting research on energy storage systems. There are a few points in your schematic that could be optimized if you reduce the intermediary layers here." I pointed to a section of the diagram. He studied me intently, as if evaluating me. Then he smiled. "I'm Neil, lead engineer at Solenoid Tech. We're stuck on the problem of heat dissipation and power distribution in fluctuating pressure environments. If you truly understand what you just said, you might be able to help us." I didn't answer right away. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Show me the real-time simulation data, and I'll try proposing an improvement." That evening, Neil and I stayed at the cafe until Maya turned off all the lights and kicked us both out. We continued talking just outside, sitting on the cafe steps. He handed me a business card. "Meet me on Monday. If what you're saying is right, I'll introduce you to someone you need to meet." I took the card, the yellow streetlight casting a glow on the words, "Solenoid Tech, David Neal, lead engineer." I knew I had just stepped up to the first door. I didn't know what lay beyond it yet, but that feeling, the feeling of being recognized for my ability, not my name, kept me awake that night. I arrived at the Solenoid Tech office on Monday morning with my old laptop, a stack of notes, and a dream folded inside my bag. The office was on the 4th floor of an old building. No flashy signs, no grand reception hall, just an open space filled with wires, components, and whiteboards covered in formulas. David Neal, the lead engineer, was holding a cup of coffee when I walked in. He gestured toward an empty desk. "You have 15 minutes. Impress me." I presented a solution for handling thermal oscillations by integrating a micropressure neutralization chamber. a technique I had independently researched during college but had never seen applied commercially. I backed it up with a simulated model and explained why their current approach was causing up to 17% efficiency loss in the system. David was silent for a long moment, then set his coffee down and nodded slowly. "I think you need to meet someone." A few days later, he took me to a research facility at the Santa Clara Institute of Technology, a private center collaborating on energy technology research. The person I was introduced to was Professor Monica Tran, an expert in applied electrochemistry and one of the pioneers in solid-state battery research in California. Monica wasn't easily impressed. The first meeting lasted nearly 4 hours, filled with sharp, scalpel-like questions. How do you ensure there's no energy dissipation in the distribution layer? Will the molecular structure in your simulation remain stable under triple the temperature fluctuation? Why use a biothermal conductive compound instead of industrial ceramics? I answered every question with everything I knew and everything I had learned on my own, from my university days to the late nights at Rust and Bean Cafe. When the session ended, Monica nodded at David. "Put her in the temporary research group. I want real-world testing within a month. If she's right, I'll grant her access to the Stanford Innovation Hub Energy Lab." I couldn't believe my ears. From a girl sleeping in a storage room, I was about to step into one of the top energy research facilities in the US, a place I had only dreamed of as a freshman. But I knew one thing. Every opportunity comes with high expectations. Failure was not an option. The 1-month trial in the research group was the most grueling period I had ever experienced. I worked morning shifts at the cafe, spent afternoons and evenings in the research team, then stayed up until 2 a.m. refining my models on my laptop. I learned how to measure intramolecular resistance with high-precision equipment, familiarize myself with nanocomposite materials, and simulate electromagnetic environments under extreme conditions. By the 4th week, I presented the first prototype of the Aurora design, a version ready for practical testing. Monica and 2 technical assistants spent an entire afternoon verifying the data. In the end, Monica simply said, "There's potential." 3 days later, I received an email. "Stanford Lab officially grants access to Margaret Preston. Project code, Aurora Beta." I stared at the words on the screen, my hands trembling. No one in the room knew that they had just opened a door for me, a door I had never been sure I would ever reach. The next few months were an endless journey forward. I moved out of the storage room and rented a small place near Stanford thanks to a research grant Monica helped me secure. I spent almost all my time in the lab, wearing a white coat, protective glasses, working with materials I had only read about in textbooks. By day, I ran experiments. By night, I wrote reports, redrew schematics, and optimized every single detail. There were nights when I collapsed asleep on my desk, waking up with tangled hair and a sore wrist. But not once did I feel exhausted in a way that made me want to quit. If anything, I felt alive, for the first time in a long time. Then, one October night, while testing the 3rd-generation Aurora prototype, the data displayed something no one had dared to hope for: a storage efficiency of 98.4%. A number never recorded before. I reran the test 3 times, using independent measuring devices, checking every circuit, every molecular layer. The result did not change. I sank into my chair, unable to believe my own eyes. A part of me wanted to scream. A part of me was afraid to breathe too hard, as if touching it too quickly would make it disappear. I sent the data to Monica with a short message. "Breakthrough confirmed. Aurora is alive." 10 minutes later, she called. "Margaret, do you realize what you've just done?" I simply replied, I just rewrote a new chapter in energy storage." On the other end, Monica was silent for a moment, then exhaled. "We need to prepare a presentation for the International Energy Conference next month. You will be the one presenting." I looked at the Aurora Project logo on my laptop screen, a soft, swirling light representing energy that never fades. I had promised myself I would create something that changes the world. And now, I had just touched it. The International Energy Conference that year was held in Seattle. I stood on stage, bright lights shining directly on my face, while hundreds of scientists, investors, and global energy executives sat in the audience. When I presented Aurora, the first high-efficiency storage system reaching nearly 98.5% performance, at one-third the cost of traditional lithium batteries, the hall fell completely silent. When I finished with, "If renewable energy is the future, then Aurora is the key to unlocking it," the applause was thunderous. Some people stood. Monica sat in the front row, eyes glistening, while David squeezed my hand backstage, whispering, "We're ready." Within 2 weeks after the conference, I received over 20 investment offers. One name stood out: Avery Capital, a venture capital firm in Austin, Texas, known for turning breakthrough tech ideas into billion-dollar empires. The invitation came from Raphael Lin, the firm's strategy director, a calm, sharp-eyed man who seemed to read thoughts. Our meeting took place in a small Mexican restaurant near the research facility. Raphael didn't waste time. "I've been following you since Aurora was just a scribbled idea. Now it's a breakthrough. I want to invest $5 million for 22% equity in the company you're about to build." I gripped my glass, not answering immediately. Raphael took a sip of coffee and continued, as if reading my hesitation. "Margaret, you don't need more people to dream with you. You need people who can turn that dream into reality, faster than anyone else out there." I was silent for a few seconds, then reached out my hand. "We have a deal." Aurora Dynamics was founded the following spring, headquartered in San Mateo, inside a technology hub near the international airport. I was no longer the engineer sleeping on park benches or curled up in a cafe storage room. Now I was the CEO, leading a team of over 30 people, including Maya, now the Chief Operating Officer, and David, Senior Technical Advisor. The first few months were a whirlwind, optimizing the supply chain, building the prototype production line, securing the first module manufacturing contracts, handling hundreds of legal documents. Each passing day, I felt both invigorated and constantly challenged. But not for a single moment did I feel lost. 1 year after receiving the initial investment, the first commercial version of Aurora Core was officially launched. Compact, sustainable, costing only half the price of lithium-ion batteries, yet lasting 3 times longer. In just 3 months, Aurora signed 17 supply contracts with solar energy companies across the U.S., from Arizona to Florida. The press called us the disruptor of the renewable energy game. I will never forget the first time I saw my product installed on the roof of a farm in New Mexico. Amidst dry fields where people once relied on old diesel generators for power. The farm owner, an elderly woman named Clara, took my hand and said, "You've brought light here. Not just electricity, but hope." I couldn't hold back my tears. 3 years after Raphael signed the first check, Aurora Dynamics went public on NASDAQ. On the first day, the stock price doubled. By the end of the week, the company's valuation surpassed $720 million. My shares, after multiple investment rounds, were worth approximately $112 million. I still remember the feeling of watching the Bloomberg ticker display the news. Aurora Dynamics, the young woman who sparked a revolution. But I didn't celebrate with champagne or lavish parties. Instead, I returned to my office, opened my old laptop, the same one I once used as a pillow while sleeping in the park, and pulled up the first file I had ever written. I reread each of the 3 promises I had made to myself, my hands trembling. But this time, from happiness. I did not use the Preston name. I created something that truly changed how people use energy. And I returned not to beg or seek validation, but as someone who had broken through every limit on my own. Yet deep down, I knew there was still one thing left unfinished. I had not returned to the place that cast me out. The house where I was once thrown $200, as if that was all I was worth. And this time, I wasn't coming back for revenge. I was coming back to prove that light always finds its way home. I never thought that day would come so soon. At the end of Q2, a headline on CNBC caught the attention of the entire Aurora Dynamics team. Preston Equity, the long-standing Boston investment firm, faces takeover risk after consecutive quarters of losses. I stared at the name on the screen. I didn't need to read the full report. Preston Equity was the company my father, Edward Preston, had built and run for 3 decades. The same company he had once expected me to join as part of the family tradition, before tossing me $200 and cutting me off. The news reported that the company was in turmoil, outdated investment portfolios, sluggish response to emerging technologies, and a mass exodus of partners. Worse still, they were facing a quiet acquisition attempt from a tech conglomerate called Equinox Holdings, a name that had never publicly appeared in the market but was clearly backed by substantial financial power. I pressed my lips together and turned to Raphael, who stood beside me. His eyes told me he already knew what I was thinking. "It's us, isn't it?" I asked quietly. Raphael nodded. Equinox is the subsidiary we established last year to acquire legacy assets that need transformation. Preston Equity is one of our targets. So far, no one inside the company knows who truly owns it. I leaned back in my chair, my mind swirling. I had spent my entire youth living under the heavy shadow of the Preston name. A family bound to wealth and power, but devoid of understanding or love. And now, in a cruel twist of fate, I was the one holding the power to decide the future of the very empire my father once used to disown me. 1 week later, I arrived in Boston. The Preston Equity office building hadn't changed. Cold gray granite walls, heavy dark wood doors, and the gold-lettered Preston and Partners sign hanging proudly above the entrance. But this time, I wasn't entering as a cast-out daughter. I was the CEO of Aurora Dynamics, and the majority stakeholder of Equinox Holdings, the company now controlling 48% of Preston Equity. The man who greeted me was Warren Stokes, the firm's vice chairman, an old, cautious, and discreet man. "This way, miss. Mr. Preston is in a board meeting. He didn't recognize me." I nodded and walked down the familiar hallway, lined with the same oil paintings I had seen throughout my childhood. The 10th floor conference room, once off limits to me, was now where I sat at the head of the table, a folder of documents placed before me. I waited. The door swung open. My father walked in. His hair was grayer, his stance less firm than before. His eyes swept past me, not recognizing me at first. He began speaking in the same commanding tone that had once silenced rooms full of executives. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to have a serious discussion about the threat from Equinox Holdings." "No need to worry, Father," I interrupted, lifting my gaze. The room fell completely silent. His eyes finally landed on me, and for the first time, he recognized me. "Margaret." I nodded and smiled, calm. "Hello, Father. It's been a long time." One of the board members stammered. You're behind Equinox?" I opened the folder and slid it toward my father. "Equinox Holdings is a subsidiary of Aurora Dynamics, and I am the one who authorized the takeover." My father froze. His eyes locked on the documents. His hand trembled slightly. "Why?" His voice was hoarse, no longer the sharp tone I once feared. I answered slowly, deliberately. "Because you once taught me that a person's worth is defined by what they can create. Today I return to prove you were right, just not in the way you expected." Warren Stokes interjected. "Ms. Margaret, what do you want from this deal?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't want to destroy Preston Equity. I want to save it. But to do that, I need to change everything, from its business model and personnel to its investment strategy. The company will be merged into Aurora's green technology ecosystem. The Preston name will be no more." My father gripped the armrest of his chair tightly. "You're willing to bury an entire legacy just for your pride?" I stood up, my voice calm but firm. "Not for pride. For the future." I left the boardroom, silence trailing behind me. As I stepped into the elevator, I heard my father call out, "Margaret!" I didn't turn back. Less than 2 hours after the board meeting, I sat in Equinox Holdings' temporary office, the 19th floor of a sleek glass building just 3 blocks from Preston Equity's headquarters. 2 phones rang non-stop on my desk, dozens of emails awaited responses, and a live financial transaction dashboard flashed constantly with numbers. I had no time for hesitation. By that afternoon, my legal team sent an official proposal to the entire Preston Equity board, a full merger into Aurora's ecosystem, complete rebranding, executive restructuring, and the complete removal of the Preston family's management rights. Attached was a warning. If the board failed to accept within 24 hours, Equinox would activate a pre-planned financial clause, calling in the debts Preston Equity owed to satellite investment branches that I had, quietly, taken control of over the past year. The exit door had been locked. That evening, I received a call from Warren Stokes. "Margaret." His voice was low. "Edward is rallying his remaining loyalists to block your proposal, but with the current share distribution, he can't stop the process if you move forward." I replied evenly, "I didn't come to ask for permission. I came to finish this." The next morning at exactly 8 a.m., Preston Equity's board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't there in person, but my legal team, representing Equinox Holdings, presented every merger clause in language that left no room for interpretation. When they reached the proposal to rename the company Aurora Capital, Warren glanced around the table, then quietly nodded. A board member raised a hand. "Who will lead after the merger?" My attorney replied smoothly, "The current board will be dissolved. The new executive structure will be appointed by Aurora Dynamics, effective tomorrow." A heavy silence filled the room. Then a voice broke through, dry, firm, and familiar. "No, I don't accept this." My father stood up, tapping his hand lightly against the ebony wood table. His gaze still carried the authority it once held, despite his hair now nearly all gray. "You think you can erase 40 years of legacy with just a few signatures? Have you all forgotten that this institution built the Northeast investment sector? That the Preston name once stood for credibility and tradition?" I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Precisely because the Preston name once carried such weight, I spoke slowly. It must end at the right moment, before it becomes a symbol of stagnation and outdated thinking. My father turned toward me. For a brief moment, I saw shock flicker across his face. "You don't have to do this, Margaret." I walked to the table and placed the finalized proposal before him. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I said, my voice steady. "I'm doing this to fix what you let wither away in complacency." His fists clenched. "You would erase everything, just to prove yourself?" I shook my head. "I've already proven myself. Without Preston, without an inheritance. Only with an idea you once called foolish and the $200 you threw on the floor." Every board member remained silent. Warren was the first to sign the proposal. Then, one by one, the others followed. Slowly but decisively, like dominoes falling in an unbroken sequence. In the end, only my father remained, the founder, the man who once believed he would be immortal on his throne of financial power. I slid the pen toward him. "I'm not forcing you to sign, but if you don't, the shareholders will vote, and the decision will still be executed." He looked at me, his gaze filled with both regret and resignation. Then, he signed. The final contract was sealed at 5:48 p.m. Preston Equity, a name once tied to the very bloodline of a family, officially became part of Aurora Capital under my leadership. As I walked out of the building, the Boston sky burned red, as if flaring one last time to bid farewell to an era. I didn't feel victorious, nor did I feel resentful. There was only a strange sense of closure, as if I had finally shut a chapter I had been afraid to open for years. My father stood at the doorway, watching. He didn't call my name again. After the merger, I spent nearly 8 months completely restructuring Preston Equity now Aurora Capital. Outdated, bloated investment portfolios were replaced with clean technology projects, renewable energy, and sustainable infrastructure. We expanded into multi-layered energy storage, green agriculture, and smart urban redevelopment. Under new leadership, the company was no longer a symbol of the past, but a driving force of innovation. I kept none of the old executives, not out of revenge, but because to build the future, we cannot anchor ourselves to what once held us back. My father, Edward Preston, quietly stepped away. He no longer appeared in the media or attended industry events. He moved to the lake house that once served as our summer retreat. A quiet place, far from the city, from the headlines, from the spotlight that had once defined his life. My mother sent me a handwritten letter after the deal was finalized. She wrote that she had been following every step I took, from the first article that mentioned Margaret Preston, the golden girl of renewable energy, to the day I officially took control of the company that bore our family's name. She said she was proud, that she had been wrong to stay silent all those years, that she wanted to see me. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I had learned that some distances cannot be bridged by a few late apologies. 1 year passed since the day I walked out of that boardroom with a historic contract. I continued to lead Aurora Dynamics, expanding into Europe and Southeast Asia. The second-generation Aurora Core project, smaller, cheaper, more powerful, had just been granted global patents. One early winter morning, Maya, now the chief operating officer at headquarters, walked into my office, holding a light brown envelope. "You got something in the mail," she said, placing it on my desk. I opened it. Inside was another smaller white envelope with no sender's name. When I pulled it out, my heart clenched slightly. A folded piece of paper. And tucked inside were 2 old $100 bills carefully pressed flat. Beneath them, in a firm but slightly slanted handwriting, was a single line. "You are worth more than I ever knew. Edward." I sat in silence for a long time, not because of the money itself, but because, for the first time in 24 years, my father admitted his mistake in the only language I had ever understood from him. Action. That afternoon, I left work early and drove back to the old district, to a small cafe called Rust and Bean, the place where it all began. The cafe was unchanged, faded wooden doors, a blackboard menu written in chalk, and the familiar scent of roasted coffee drifting through old brick walls. Chuck, the old owner, had retired, passing the cafe down to his daughter. But the coffee machine I once fixed years ago was still there, still running, perfectly. I sat down by the window seat, the same spot where I had first sketched the Aurora design on my worn-out laptop screen. Ordering a cappuccino and a croissant, I pulled the envelope from my wallet, took out the 2 old bills, placed them on the table, and wrote on a napkin. This was my starting point, keep it, to remember that great things can begin in the humblest of places. I handed it to the waitress with a smile. "Please give this to the owner. It's a tip." Then, I walked out of the cafe, the golden hues of the setting sun casting a warm glow behind me. I had once left home with a small suitcase, a laptop, and $200 thrown at my feet. I returned with a company worth hundreds of millions, thousands of employees, and a mission greater than myself. But my true worth wasn't measured in those numbers. What I had learned was this. A person's value is not defined by where they were born, not by the name they carry, but by what they choose to build with what they have. And sometimes, something as small as 2 dismissed banknotes can be the beginning of an empire. From a rejected girl with $200 and a dream deemed foolish, I built an empire that changed the way the world uses energy. But this journey was never about proving my worth to others. It was about proving to myself that where we start does not determine where we end. What matters is that we dare to begin, dare to persist, and dare to create. I did not become who I am despite my past. I became who I am because of it. And now I live as myself, not seeking validation, only ensuring that I have no regrets. I am Lisa, 34 years old, working as an accountant for a small pharmaceutical company in the suburbs of Boston. I have been married to Andrew for 6 years, and throughout all that time, I have never truly felt like I belonged in his family. From the first time I met my mother-in-law, Margaret, I sensed that something was off. It was the way her eyes scrutinized me from head to toe, the polite yet cold smile, and the sweet yet subtly sharp tone when she said, "Andrew, you didn't mention that Lisa went to community college." Then she turned to me, smiling as if giving a compliment. "Oh, how wonderful that someone can build a stable life without relying on prestige." I forced a smile. Back then, I thought, maybe she just needed time to warm up to me. I was wrong. Margaret had 2 daughters, Emily and Rachel. Both older than me, both the kind of women she took great pride in. One was a medical resident, the other a marketing director for a cosmetics brand. In their eyes, I was just an ordinary office worker, nothing noteworthy. And they made no effort to hide it. At every family gathering, Margaret always seated me at the far end of the table, away from the main conversation. Emily would start talking about late-night emergency cases, Rachel would go on about her latest ad campaign, and I would sit there, nodding and smiling at the right moments, like a shadow in my own family dinner. And Andrew? He never said a word. I once whispered to him after dinner, "I feel like I'm not welcome." He just shrugged. "You're overthinking, they just need time." Time passed. 3 months, then 3 years. Nothing changed. Holidays, family trips. I was always the last to know, if I even knew at all. Once, they went on a week-long trip to Cape Cod without saying a word to me. When I asked Andrew, he casually replied, "I thought you were busy with work, so I didn't invite you." I remember sitting in the living room, watching Andrew text his mother openly, not even trying to hide it. I asked, "Have you ever thought about standing by my side?" He looked up, slightly surprised. "Why would I take sides? Everything's fine." Everything was fine, for him. He had his mother, his sisters, cozy dinners filled with laughter, while I sat alone in the kitchen or waited outside for the car because no one noticed when I left. Margaret remained the same. Her words always sounded like compliments, but beneath them lay veiled insults. "Lisa, that lipstick color is interesting, but as long as you feel confident, that's what matters." Or, "Wow, Andrew told me you're not much of a cook, but you've kept your husband for 6 years. That's impressive." I had sat in the bathroom crying, gripping a washcloth as if it could hold back my rising anger. I didn't understand why they treated me this way. What had I done wrong? I loved Andrew. I tried everything to fit in, but not a single person in his family ever truly welcomed me. They saw me as an outsider, and what hurt me the most was, so did my husband. I had stayed silent for too long. But I wasn't the type to bow my head forever. There were things I had seen, things I knew, and one day, I would no longer stand on the sidelines. This Thanksgiving, Margaret was hosting dinner at her winter estate in Ridgefield, Connecticut. The 3-story house, covered in dried ivy and glowing with warm golden lights, looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Everything was perfect. Except for the emptiness I felt as I stepped through the grand front door. Andrew, as always, didn't hold my hand, didn't look at me. He just rushed forward to hug his mother, then turned to his sisters. Emily, dressed in an elegant blazer with the scent of expensive perfume, laughed as she recounted a recent heart surgery. Rachel, her blonde waves perfectly styled, leaned in to kiss Margaret on the cheek. I stood there by the shoe cabinet, wondering if I was truly invited or just someone's +1. "Oh, Lisa!" Rachel was the first to acknowledge me, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "A red dress? That's bold." She didn't smile, but her tone and expression made her message clear. I simply offered a faint smile and walked into the living room, where everyone had already gathered around the meticulously set dining table. Dinner went as it always did. Perfectly roasted turkey, homemade pumpkin pie, and the same old conversations, replayed like a worn-out tape every year. No one asked about my job or my life. I was merely decorum. Silent, polite, unnoticed. After dessert, Margaret stood up and clapped her hands, her voice carrying the excitement of someone about to unveil a grand performance. "Now, my favorite part, Thanksgiving gifts." Light applause spread across the table. I glanced at Andrew. He smiled as he poured himself more wine, not once looking at me. Margaret began handing out gifts wrapped in satin ribbons. A designer wallet for Rachel, a sapphire necklace for Emily, a bottle of 1998 Bordeaux for Andrew. Even Rachel's twin daughters, only 8 years old, received a limited edition Lego set. I sat up straight, hands resting lightly on my lap, saying nothing. A small flicker of hope still lingered in me. Maybe this time they wouldn't forget. Maybe. Margaret turned to me with an exaggeratedly bright smile. "Lisa? Oh dear, I think I forgot to get you something." Emily burst into laughter. Rachel shrugged. "No big deal. Lisa understands, right?" I didn't say a word. And what hurt me more than Margaret or my sisters-in-law was Andrew, throwing his head back in laughter as if it was the funniest joke of the night. Suddenly, everything became crystal clear. 6 years of patience, 6 years of trying to find a place in a family that never wanted me. How many chances had I wasted to stand up for myself? How many times had I belittled myself just to earn a fake smile? I set my wine glass down and looked straight at Margaret. "It's okay," I said, my voice as light as a breeze. "Actually, I didn't forget about all of you." Silence fell over the room as if someone had switched off the music. I calmly reached into my bag and pulled out a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a silver ribbon. Not luxurious, not flashy, but neat and deliberate. I placed it in front of Margaret. "For you," I said, keeping my smile. "A very special gift." I saw a flicker of suspicion cross her face. Margaret hesitated, touching the ribbon with her fingertips as if afraid of what might be inside. Rachel and Emily leaned in. Andrew furrowed his brows. "Go ahead," I murmured. Margaret unwrapped the paper, lifted the lid, and as she saw the neatly stacked papers inside, bank statements, financial transaction reports, and a summary of assets, her smile disappeared instantly. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the pages, her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. I said nothing, merely pouring myself another glass of wine, savoring the thick silence blanketing the room. Rachel grabbed a handful of papers from her mother's hands and skimmed through them. Her expression changed almost immediately. "Lisa! What is this?" I looked up. My tone as casual as if I were discussing the weather. "Financial reports from Margaret's table. The event planning company my dear mother-in-law has been running for nearly 2 decades. Emily snatched another document, her gaze turning serious. "These are bank statements, income summaries, and... is this a tax return?" "Exactly," I nodded, a faint smile playing on my lips, with clear evidence that Margaret has been underreporting her revenue for at least the past 6 years. Some earnings weren't declared. Some expenses were inflated or completely fabricated. Margaret set her wine glass down, but her movement was so unsteady that a few drops spilled over. She turned to me, her voice hoarse. "Where did you get these?" "Ah, I didn't have to look far," I replied, placing my glass down as I met her eyes. "Just had to pay attention. A few numbers on the company's website didn't match the revenue reports. A few grand events were heavily promoted, yet missing from tax filings. And there were cash transactions. I know, because I saw them myself." Rachel inhaled sharply. "Mom, is this true?" Margaret didn't answer. She was too busy trying to mask the growing panic in her eyes. I tilted my head. "And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I also found that the parent company received a grant from the city, supposedly for post-pandemic recovery, but that money never appeared in the financial statements. You reported it as payroll expenses, yet the only full-time employee left is your personal assistant. Andrew finally spoke, his voice unsteady. Lisa, why would you do this? I turned to him, my gaze calm. You want to know why? For 6 years, I've been invisible in this family, left out of every conversation, every plan, every ounce of affection. I never reacted, not once. But do you know what finally woke me up, Andrew? It was tonight, when the whole table laughed because I had no gift, and you laughed along with them. Emily spoke, this time without mockery. And how long have you been investigating this? Almost a year, I replied. At first, it was just curiosity, but the more I looked, the clearer everything became. Margaret started flipping through the remaining pages in a frantic attempt to find some loophole to refute it all, but the more she turned, the paler she became. There were bank transfers from the company into her personal accounts, there were falsified receipts, there were invalid tax deductions. Rachel took a step back. Mom, you told me you couldn't help when I needed a loan to fix my house. You said the company was struggling. Emily frowned. And you told me you couldn't co-sign my daughter's tuition loan because you couldn't afford it? No one was looking at me anymore. Every gaze was now locked onto Margaret, the woman who, just minutes ago, had played the devoted mother, now struggling to keep her composure. I folded my arms. I wasn't planning to report anything, at least, not yet. I just wanted to show everyone that if I'm going to be treated like I don't exist, then I can also make sure this family remembers me. In a way no one wants. Andrew stared at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. Do you really want to destroy my mother? I met his eyes, unblinking. No, Andrew. I'm just revealing the truth. She did this to herself. A moment later, Margaret exhaled sharply, her lips trembling. You can't do this. You'll bring my entire family down with me. I looked at her, my eyes unwavering. No one forced you to commit fraud. No one made you do anything wrong. And certainly, no one made you treat me like I was worthless. Rachel's voice came out hoarse, as if she had lost all her breath. Lisa, are you absolutely sure these documents are real? I nodded. Everything is sourced from the bank and the IRS. If you want to verify, you can call the accountant your mother's company used. I've already contacted them and kept a record of the call. Emily suddenly turned to Margaret, suspicion creeping into her eyes. Mom, you told me you couldn't help when I needed to put down a deposit on a new house. You said you didn't have a single cent to spare. Rachel flipped to another page, her frown deepening. This bank transfer here, it's from Dad's account? I nodded again, this time not looking at Margaret but at the man sitting at the head of the table. Henry, Margaret's husband, Andrew's father. He had barely spoken all evening. He was a quiet man, always in the background of every family event. But now, his face was gradually draining of color. No way, he murmured, reaching for one of the documents Rachel held. His eyes scanned the transaction details. Thousands of dollars withdrawn from his retirement account over the past 3 years, marked as operating fees, reinvestment, or worse, with no label at all. Margaret spoke, her voice sharp. Henry, you don't understand. It was just a temporary transfer. No, he cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. I never authorized this. I never knew. He stood up from his chair, gripping the papers tightly, his face white as a sheet. How much of this is real, Margaret? How much did you take? What did you do with the money? Margaret's eyes darted around, her expression faltering. I did it for the family. I needed to keep the company afloat, to take care of the kids. Rachel let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You can't say you did this for us when you refused to help me when I was unemployed. You said you couldn't loan me money to fix my house, but here, she held up a document. You transferred tens of thousands into your personal account? Emily stepped next to Henry, her voice turning cold. And this? This came from Dad's retirement fund. You took the only financial safety net he had. Do you even realize how awful that is? Margaret suddenly shouted. Everything I did was to protect this family's reputation. You don't understand the pressure of maintaining our image, of making sure no one looks down on us. Henry pressed a hand to his forehead, his breathing growing labored. He clutched the edge of the table, his lips trembling. I immediately stepped forward. Are you okay? He didn't answer. His face turned red, then ashen. Call an ambulance, I shouted. Rachel had already pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. Emily grabbed their father's shoulders, guiding him back into his chair. Margaret stumbled back, her face pale. Henry, no. Don't do this. He gasped for air, clutching his chest, his eyes glazing over. I rushed to the front door, ready to guide the paramedics when they arrived. My mind raced with questions. Would he make it? What else had Margaret been hiding? And Andrew, would he still stand by her after everything? The sound of sirens filled the air minutes later. Paramedics rushed in, carrying a stretcher and medical equipment. Margaret screamed his name, but I noticed she didn't reach for him, didn't hold his hand, didn't whisper anything comforting. It was all just tears and cries, a clumsy performance in the play she had written. Andrew stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes locked on the chaos in front of him. I looked at him, but this time I wasn't waiting anymore. No explanation, no apology could erase what I had endured. Andrew reached out, barely brushing my hand. Lisa, is this real? I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. Too real. As the ambulance pulled away, the family stood in silence. Margaret collapsed into a chair, all her usual pride stripped away. Rachel and Emily didn't comfort her. Andrew said nothing. I stepped out onto the porch, the late November air biting against my skin. But I felt light, as if a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. The waiting room at Yale New Haven Hospital was cold and eerily quiet. The white fluorescent lights reflected off the polished tile floor, making the space feel even more impersonal. I sat on one of the stiff plastic chairs, my hands clasped together, my eyes fixed on the blank wall as if it could give me answers. Andrew sat a few seats away. He hadn't spoken since his father was taken away. Rachel and Emily were murmuring with the doctor, their faces still tense. Margaret was somewhere down the hall, a nurse checking on her after she'd claimed to feel faint. But I knew. What brought her to her knees wasn't concern for her husband. It was the truth that had just been exposed. Lisa. Andrew's voice was so soft I almost missed it. I turned. His eyes were clouded, full of confusion and exhaustion. This. He swallowed hard. Did you plan all of this from the beginning? Did you do this to get revenge on my mother? A cold shiver ran down my spine. So that was his first thought, after everything. Not, are you okay? Not, why didn't you tell me sooner? But, did you do this to destroy my mother? I took a slow breath. No, Andrew, I didn't plan anything. But I couldn't pretend to be blind any longer. I've been pushed aside for too long, and this time, I chose not to stay silent. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. You don't understand. My mother isn't a bad person. She just... I let out a laugh, though my throat tightened. She's not a bad person. She humiliated me over and over, treated me like I was invisible. And you? You stood there, silent, smiling. Even tonight you laughed when I was cast aside in front of everyone. Andrew said nothing. I pulled off my wedding ring, the diamond catching the harsh hospital light, mocking the love I once believed in. I placed it in his hand so gently he barely reacted. Lisa, he murmured, as if waking from a dream. I looked at him, not with anger, not with resentment, but with nothing left to hold on to. Andrew, I didn't destroy your family. They did that themselves. I just refused to stay quiet. His hand clenched around the ring, his eyes reddening. "Are you leaving me?" "No, Andrew," I said firmly. "I'm choosing myself." I turned and walked away. The automatic doors slid open before me, the cold winter wind hitting my face, sharpening my clarity. My footsteps echoed against the pavement. No hesitation, no regrets. I didn't know if Henry would survive. I didn't care what excuse Margaret would come up with. But one thing was certain. From this moment on, my life would no longer be dictated by people who never valued me. Outside the hospital, I pulled out my phone and deleted Andrew's contact. Not out of anger, but because no matter what realization he might come to in the future, I wouldn't be there waiting for him to choose me. I chose myself, and that was the first decision in 6 years that made me feel truly at peace. Just 3 days after Thanksgiving, I received a message from Rachel. "Dad is filing for divorce. His lawyers submitted the paperwork this morning. Mom will lose control of the company next week." I wasn't surprised. When I left the hospital that night, I had seen something break in Henry's eyes. Not just his trust in his wife, but the patience he had carried through decades of marriage. He was the kind of man who endured, but he wasn't a fool. And when the truth came to light, he had no reason to stay anymore. Rachel and Emily quickly made their own decisions. There was no family meeting, no final conversation with their mother. The sisters hired lawyers to investigate the money Margaret had taken from the family accounts and began legal proceedings. Rachel also mentioned that she was selling her current apartment and moving to Vermont, where her husband's family lived. She didn't want her children growing up in an environment that was as deceitful and cold as the one Mom created. I didn't blame them. In fact, I respected them for finally choosing to stand up for themselves, something I had once wished I had the courage to do sooner. As for Margaret, I didn't hear much except that she had hired a legal team to clarify administrative discrepancies with the IRS. There were rumors that she was selling the Ridgefield estate to cover the damages. No one in the family was taking her calls anymore, not even Andrew. He had called me 7 times, sent 15 messages, emailed me, even wrote a handwritten letter. I read every single one but never replied. There was one line in his last letter that made me pause. "I was too late, wasn't I?" "Yes, Andrew. You were 6 years too late. I had once wished, just once, that you would stand up for me. But you never did. And now, when everything has fallen apart, you finally understand. But I've already moved on. I changed my number, locked my social media accounts, moved out of the old apartment in Cambridge and into a small, quiet place near the Charles River. Close enough to my office that I could walk there every morning. I bought a few potted plants, a new rug, and, for the first time in years, I put up paintings I liked. Without asking for anyone's approval. One Saturday afternoon, I brewed some tea and sat down with a leather notebook I had bought long ago but never used. I wrote one sentence. "I'm not waiting for you to choose me anymore because I have already chosen myself." I smiled. Not the polite, forced smile I had worn for years at family dinners, but a real smile, light, unburdened. I thought about the time I had lost, the wasted efforts to please people who never saw me as part of their family. But I no longer regretted it. Everything I had been through led me to this moment, where I knew I deserved more. I didn't know how Margaret would face the trials ahead. I didn't know if Andrew would ever truly change. But none of that mattered anymore. I had walked away from a house that had given me nothing but silence and loneliness for 6 years. I had left behind a wedding ring, a symbol of a marriage that was never fair. And I had stepped out of a shadow I never belonged to. Now I was no longer Lisa, the daughter-in-law who had to smile and stay silent. I was Lisa, the woman who knew her worth, knew when to leave, and dared to do it without regret. And if anyone ever asked me, was it worth it? I would answer with a smile brighter than any Thanksgiving gift. Every single second. From my own story, I learned that silence isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's self-destruction. 6 years in a family that never accepted me taught me one thing. If you wait for others to give you value, you will always be forgotten. The most powerful choice I ever made wasn't leaving them, it was choosing myself. Because in this world, no one will stand up for you if you don't stand up for yourself. What do you think of Lisa's choice and how she stood up for herself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more emotional family stories and deep life lessons.